And so you've got to just be able to weigh the cost. Are you willing to take the risk in order to have the potential reward? Well, hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 480, the one where I talk about hurricanes. Okay, it's not really about hurricanes, but I have a teachable moment. Okay, so today is a Tuesday. Baby, what's the date today? September the 23rd-ish. Okay. Thank you, darling. It's around that time. And wait, or the 24th. I think it's 24th. I think it's 24th. Anyhow, as I speak, there is currently a hurricane barreling towards Florida. They have now named it Hurricane Helene, I believe. And we have a property on the ocean in Florida. Many of you are familiar with and follow the Bougie on the Beach Instagram account. Thank you for that. Many of you found that because I had a post go viral this summer about rip currents, etc. So anywho, all right. So hurricane is currently barreling towards Florida. It is supposed to come in at like a category 4. Yes, it could shift, but wherever it hits, we're praying it just dissipates and doesn't, right? Because it's awful for whoever is going to be hit by it. But that is not the point of this podcast. And by the time you listen to this podcast, the hurricane will have passed. Hopefully there is no loss of life. Hopefully there is no loss of property. Obviously, life is the most important, but can I just for the sake of just you knowing, if maybe you don't know, like when properties are damaged in places like Florida that are heavily funded by tourism, and you have tons and tons of people such as ourselves who have real estate in Florida in the tourism sector. So, we have our Airbnbs and things because it's, we're in real estate. And so when that happens, loss of property can be devastating because it's as like an Airbnb or VRBO owner, like not only is there the devastation of possibly losing some of your property, the roof has to be replaced. There's flooding that comes in, and we're so high up on a bluff at Bougie on the Beach that we will not have to worry about any flooding, with the rise and surge. But there's wind damage that can happen, water damage that can happen, things can be just absolutely destroyed. So there is, property damage, but then also if you are someone who does short-term rentals, then you have like the time that it takes to get things fixed. So you automatically can no longer take rentals during that stretch of time, which is income, and a lot of people are very reliant on that in order to make the mortgage of their short-term rental every month. And so lots of prayers going out to Florida right now. But again, that is not the meaning of this podcast. So what I want to talk about on this podcast is this. Jason and I are currently looking for a second property on the Florida Panhandle. So we're looking for this one to be a little closer to the Destin Miramar Beach area. Our other one is on 30A. And so last weekend I went down to look at a property, and I posted about that on like my Instagram stories. And inevitably when I do that, but especially like now when there's hurricane warnings out, I will have people ask, aren't you worried about like buying again in Florida with the possibility of hurricanes? And I think that that's a valid question. And I would say like on weeks like this week, I mean, absolutely, right? Absolutely. This is not a week where, that is the forefront of everybody's mind this week is just the weather down there. Okay. So it's definitely something to be concerned about. And we've owned Bougie on the Beach for 3 years, and this is by far the biggest threat that we've had in particular to our area so far. So, and then one more thing, and then we'll get on with the podcast, but the locals in Florida will tell you just to prepare yourself for the fact that you could have one hurricane really hit the area that you own in directly once a decade. So every 10 years, you just kind of need to plan on almost, having some damage done, or just knowing that you'll probably take a direct hit in whatever city you're in. And I know that this sounds awful, but I want you to also know that like Jason and I live full-time in Kansas City, where we have, tornadoes every season, and often many tornadoes every season. This year was a little weird. There were hardly any tornado warnings, but the year's not over. We also own Bougie in the Desert, which is just outside of Scottsdale in Arizona. And so there we run the risk of rattlesnakes, We run the risk of bobcats. We run the risk of scorpions. We run the risk of mountain lions. So there's risks there too, or falling off of a trail and onto a cactus. And then you've got an ER visit where they're digging out, the needles. But, I was raised in Iowa where there was also tornadoes every year. If I lived in California, I would have to worry about the potential of earthquakes. And so I think there's literally risks to living anywhere, right? There's literally risks. I mean, even like snowstorms, if you're in, Colorado or Utah, can cause property damage and cause harm to people. So there's literally risks everywhere. So in terms of like where to live and things, I mean, you always just kind of have to pick your poison, right? What are you comfortable with? What are you okay with? Acknowledging that, yes, this is the type of weather that could happen in this area, but we're willing basically to take the risk. Because then I want to go back to the question that I get asked, worrying about buying another property. Are you worried about that with so many hurricanes? And this is what my answer is to that. And then I'm tying this to business. Okay. So just go with me here. Yes, it is worrisome to know that there's a hurricane barreling towards Florida right now. But the reward of us having that place in Florida so far outweighs that risk, that it's like, it's not even a fair question. Does that make sense? Like having a home to go to for our family in Florida, it just brings us so much joy. It's a place for us to vacation. It's a place for us to reconnect. We get to take so many of our friends and family. It restores my peace. It restores, in a lot of ways, my health as a postmenopausal woman who's got some hormone issues going on, who has a toxin overload, who really needs to calm down my nervous system. Anytime you can get around water, that is going to be so healing and therapeutic. I did a whole podcast on that. If you're watching on YouTube and you didn't listen to that podcast, ask me about it in the comments, send me a DM on Instagram otherwise, and I can give you a link to that. But anyway, like, having Bougie on the beach gives our family a place to vacation. It gives our friends and family members places to go. Right now, our pastor and his wife are at our condo in Florida and will be there the next week. And I'm like, okay, who better to be at our place with a hurricane coming towards it than our pastor, his wife? Not that God hears their prayers anymore, but maybe. I'm kidding, but maybe. And so, we have friends and family that it's a blessing to. That outweighs the risk of the hurricanes. Having a rental property is such a great tax deduction. If you listen to my free 4-part series on short-term rentals, like I talked about that a little bit on there, it's great in terms of helping you with taxes. And so it's very lucrative in terms of like building equity in a property. I mean, our property in Florida in the 3 years that we have owned it, trying to think of what percentage it's increased 60% in value in 3 years, I think. I mean, that's huge financially. And so, yes, there is a risk of hurricanes, but like everything else outweighs that risk. All those rewards completely outweigh the risk. So then I think, okay, as always, I'm always thinking about, my clients, my potential clients, those of you who are here listening on the podcast, and I'm always trying to like tie it back to life and business. And is there a lesson we can learn from this? And so this morning I was thinking about this and I was thinking, there are so many things that we really need to see if the reward outweighs the risks. This pertains to a lot of different things. Like maybe you work at a 9-to-5 right now and you really want to start your own business, or you've already started your own business and you want to be able to quit your 9-to-5 and go all in on the business. Maybe you wish you were brave enough to do that, right? But in order to have the reward of having said business, you would have to take the risk of letting go of your perceived safety. Because by the way, when you work with somebody else, it's never real safety. It's perceived safety. You don't have any idea if that's safer than you going into business for yourself or not. You think that relying on somebody else to give you a paycheck every 2 weeks is safer, but is it? Because at any time, your position could be eliminated, which has happened to me. You could be let go, which happens to people all the time. Company could change directions. Company could shut down with no warning. Like you're literally putting your future into the hands of somebody else. So if you want the freedom that business ownership provides, you have to be willing to take the risk of letting go of that perceived safety. Another example, If you're wanting to grow your social media, which is, of course, I mean, what I do is I provide women with strategy and software in order to grow their small business online, in terms of marketing, in terms of social media, et cetera. So if you want to grow your social media, there's great benefit to that, right? You get in front of more people, you make more sales, bada boom, bada bing. I mean, how is that not, a win-win? But you have to risk then like the vulnerability of being in the online space. You have to risk kind of putting yourself out there. You have to risk how that feels to, post and let people see it and to be seen and to be the face of your company, et cetera. There's risk to that. I just did podcast episode 479. You can go listen to that about, negative comments on social media and how I basically was calling people up to just better behavior. Here's another example. If you've started your small business and you've got your social media, but you really want to grow your small business, you're going to have to at some point hire people. You can hire Team Allwood to build your website. You can hire us to do your email. You can hire us to help with your social. You can hire us to do a lot of things. But when you hire us or anyone else, you run risks. You run the risks of us not doing what we say we're going to do. You run the risk of people stealing from you. You run the risk of people ghosting you. You run the risk of you pay people and nothing gets done. Like those are all real risks. But you do get also to a place in your business where you run out of time or you run out of talent. I did an podcast episode on that too, really recently. You can find it if you just Google Jennifer Allwood podcast, you run out of time or talent. You're going to run out of one of those two things eventually, and you're going to have to hire help. But there is a risk that comes from doing that, right? Are you willing to take that risk? Speaking of the software, that we sell, have hundreds of users for, that was a real risk for us to, create the software. We were white labeling a software that's been around for years and years and years, but it is super scary to spend that kind of money to develop the software. It definitely felt like a risk from my end, the one looking at the P&L every month. But on the other side, now I have an additional revenue stream that's super sticky that people will stay with. And now I see the fruit of people, of women in particular, who have finally got a website started after being in business for 4 years. They've finally got an email list started after 6 years of saying they're going to start an email list. Like now they've got an email list started. They're making sales that way. Like there's that joy that comes from that. And so I'm so glad that we took the risk, as I'm sure all of our clients are as well on that software. And so I think so often people are so scared, they're so consumed by, they're so focused on the risks that they're not willing to go for the things that they want to. And they are literally like foregoing their right to the rewards that they really wish that they could enjoy. It's like all they can see are the risks. They don't see that sometimes the higher the risks, the higher the rewards. Not all the time, but sometimes for sure. But all people see sometimes, all they zero in on is risks, hurricanes. Okay, yes, but also there's 360 days a year where there's no hurricane threats. And there's the most incredible white sand on the panhandle. And we get to see dolphins and sea turtles and, stingrays and manatees. Like those are fabulous. Like those are such great rewards. You can't be so zeroed in on the risks that you don't see any rewards. It's like I can't see the forest for the trees. All you're seeing is danger, 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 instead of, okay, is this actually a danger? Is this a danger that I could actually go ahead and take on? Is this a danger that I'm willing to take in order to have a possibility of the rewards? This is, I think, the price, you guys, of entrepreneurship. You have to be able to take the risks of vulnerability, of, stability, of relying on some other people to help you build things in order to completely go all in on your business. And then, the risk is, of course, the business could go totally belly up. It could make no money. It could go right down the tubes. It could be, a lost cause. You could go bankrupt. You could lose everything. You could lose nothing though, too. The reward for starting a business or growing a business or scaling a business is 3 things. You ready for this? There's 3 different types of freedom you will get from owning a business if you do it right. Time freedom, financial freedom and location freedom. I was just listening to Pedro Adao talking about location freedom the other day, and I was like, this is one that isn't talked about enough, because having the ability to work from anywhere in the world is such a gift, friends. It's such a gift. I love it so much. But in order to do that, you also have to be willing to take the risks of entrepreneurship. And let me just remind you that if you really are wired for entrepreneurship, like if God gifted you in that area, if you're really being called to that, you are going to instinctively be wired to a degree to take risks. You just literally will. And that, of course, means to varying degrees. Like, I think Jason and I are both risk takers. I'm probably even more of a risk taker, I think, than what he is. And so, to varying degrees, you will innately just have some risk-taking abilities within you. And I just want to remind you as well that, like, sometimes it's taking a risk on something that is actually the motivator to do the hard work that's necessary to start or grow or scale something. Okay. Some of you, your business is not growing because you're still a 9 to 5. I'm just going to say it is what it is. You're not hungry. You've got another job. It's when you have no other options that you tend to go all in. A hungry belly is one of the best ways to grow a business. It just literally is. If you're desperate to get money into your bank account, you will push for sales harder than if you had a bank full of money. And so sometimes taking a risk is exactly what needs to happen inside of a business owner and, inside of a business in order for it to get to the next level. So I was coaching with one of my mastermind clients the other day, and she was telling me that she's really feeling stuck in her business right now because she made some bad financial decisions in her last business, which really cost her family. And she's still, really sensitive about that, still feels the pain of that, etc. And I had to remind her, listen, at least you took the risk on that past business. Most people will never do that. Most people will never get to that level. Most people will be so scared that they will never bet on themselves. Most people will never even have an idea for a business, let alone be willing to take the jump to actually try it. Most people will never risk going against the norm. It makes me think of that movie, that whole series on Divergent. I loved that, especially when I was really growing in the coaching space a decade ago. I loved those 4 movies, or was there 3 in the Divergent? I didn't like her short hair. Did anybody else, do you agree? Like, I wish that she wouldn't have cut her hair. What was her name? It was 4. And what was her name? Trist. Remember when Trist chopped off her hair in the second one? I didn't love it. Anyway, so they were divergent, which means that they didn't fit into like society's boxes. Entrepreneurs don't fit inside of society's boxes. And some people are just not willing to not fit, which is what's going to happen if you're going to start, grow, or scale a business. It just is. Most people are not willing not to have PDOs or traditional, health insurance or, bonuses every year. They're just not willing to do that. They're never going to give up their perceived safety to start something. So I was telling her, like, pat yourself on the back for having the guts to actually go for something, even if it failed. That's not a failure. The business failed. You're not a failure. And I think that that's an important distinction. Okay. Because anytime you are working for somebody else, by the way, I mean, people think that that's safer. But it's not. Like, your future is tied to the decision-making of that person or that board of directors or whatever else. Your future is tied to them, and they could at any moment decide something different. So for all those people who are unwilling to take the risks and bet on themselves, it means it's highly unlikely they're ever going to have time freedom, financial freedom, and location freedom. They might get location freedom. I have friends that get to work from home, but they don't have time freedom and financial freedom. And so, yes, it is always a concern about hurricanes to own in Florida. But again, the reward outweighs the risks. And some of you need to be reminded today that, yes, it is a risk to start, grow, or scale your own business. But I want you to maybe focus on the rewards instead of the risk right now. Because, of course, there's always the risk of it not working out. And there's always the potential of it actually being freaking amazing. And so you've got to just be able to weigh the cost. Are you willing to take the risk in order to have the potential reward? So hope that this was helpful today. If you're watching on YouTube, if you just leave me a comment below, because I read every single one and I love getting those. It helps other people to see the podcast. If you're loved this and know somebody who could benefit from it, send this to them. And every time you share the podcast, that's helpful to us and shows so much love. So thank you. Bless you, my friends. I hope this was amazing for you today and encouraged you. We'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye-bye. Okay, that was weird. I have my ringer on, Easton. How timely was that? It rang right at the end.